The pen slipped from Ethan Marshall's fingers, clattering to the sterile floor of the examination room. ALS, 2 to 5 years at most. Dr. Neha Sharma's voice was gentle but final. At this stage, I recommend we focus on making you comfortable and preparing for what's ahead. At 26, the acclaimed novelist stared at his trembling hand, the hand that had written worlds into existence, now betraying him with each subtle quiver. "There must be something," he said, his voice steadier than the fingers he could no longer trust. "I'm sorry, Ethan. There's no cure." Dr. Sharma leaned forward slightly, her clinical detachment softening. "But we can talk about managing symptoms, about making the most of the time you have." Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what you think will happen next. And if you want more stories that touch the light within your heart, like this video, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. Welcome to In the Heartlight. Let's begin. Ethan Marshall's days once followed a satisfying rhythm. Mornings were for writing, 500 words minimum before allowing himself breakfast. Afternoons for teaching creative writing at the community college, a part-time position that paid just enough to supplement his modest advance for his second novel. Evenings for reading, research, and occasionally meeting friends at the local pub, where no one treated him like the literary wunderkind the New York Times had called him after his debut. His small apartment was functional rather than stylish, dominated by overflowing bookshelves and a vintage desk that had belonged to his grandfather. The desk where his characters came to life, where he'd written the final draft of Thresholds, the novel that had launched his career. His editor had called the book a remarkable debut, with prose that cuts to the marrow of human experience. What readers and critics connected with most was Ethan's ability to find meaning in struggle, to reveal the dignity in ordinary lives facing extraordinary challenges. "You write like someone who's lived twice as long as you have," his mentor had once told him. Where does that understanding come from? Ethan never had a good answer. He'd lived a relatively sheltered life, loving parents who taught at the state university, a close relationship with his younger sister Lily, educational opportunities that had nurtured his talents. Perhaps it was simply that he listened more than he talked, observed more than he judged. The first sign something was wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Ethan sat at his grandfather's desk, fingers poised over his keyboard as he had thousands of times before. But today, something was different. His right pinky wouldn't cooperate, drifting to the wrong keys. After mistyping the same word 3 times, he flexed his hand, frowning at the unfamiliar weakness. "Damn it," he muttered, massaging his palm. "That's what I get for typing till 3 a.m. A week later, he dropped a mug of coffee, watching with surprise as it slipped from fingers that had always been dexterous and reliable. When he gripped his pen during office hours, his handwriting appeared increasingly jagged, prompting a student to ask if he was all right. "Yeah, I'm fine," he answered with a forced smile. "Been pulling too many late nights on this novel. Nothing coffee can't fix." But the excuse was wearing thin even to his own ears. The morning he tried to button his shirt and couldn't manage it, a quiet dread settled over him. 3 buttons, 20 minutes, and still his fingers trembled and fumbled. Standing before his bathroom mirror, Ethan noticed the subtle twitching in his forearm muscles, small ripples beneath the skin that never fully quieted. When he finally called his doctor, he described the symptoms with a novelist's precision. The referral to a neurologist came quickly. Too quickly. The series of tests that followed, nerve conduction studies, electromyography, MRIs, each eliminated more benign possibilities, narrowing toward a diagnosis he refused to name even in his thoughts. "The findings are consistent with early-stage ALS," Dr. Sharma said finally, looking up from her tablet. Her voice was gentle but clinical, compassionate yet unflinching. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Ethan had prepared himself for this possibility, had researched extensively during the weeks of testing. yet hearing the 3 letters spoken aloud made his chest tighten. "You're young for this diagnosis," she continued, "which unfortunately often indicates a more aggressive progression. I wish I had better news." "How certain are you?" Ethan asked, his writer's mind already searching for alternative narratives, different endings to this story. "The symptoms, combined with your EMG results and the ruling out of other conditions, I'm confident in the diagnosis." She paused, studying him with dark, intelligent eyes. "You seem remarkably composed." "I'm still processing," he admitted. "It doesn't feel real yet." Dr. Sharma nodded, then reached for a pen to make notes in his chart. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering to the sterile floor of the examination room. Both looked at it lying there, a small, ordinary object suddenly fraught with meaning. When she retrieved it, Ethan noticed the slight tremble in his own hand as he reached to accept a brochure on ALS support services. ALS. 2 to 5 years at most. Dr. Sharma's voice remained steady. "At this stage, I recommend we focus on making you comfortable and preparing for what's ahead." At 26, the acclaimed novelist stared at his trembling hand, the hand that had written worlds into existence, now betraying him with each subtle quiver. "There must be something," he said, his voice steadier than the fingers he could no longer trust. "I'm sorry, Ethan, there's no cure." Dr. Sharma leaned forward slightly, her clinical detachment softening. "But we can talk about managing symptoms, about making the most of the time you have." The call to his parents was excruciating. His mother, a psychology professor, immediately began researching experimental treatments. His father, who taught philosophy, grew unusually quiet, processing the news through his own analytical framework. Ethan knew they were doing what they could to cope with the unthinkable. Telling Lily was even harder. At 24, his younger sister was in her first year of medical residency, her knowledge making the reality of his diagnosis all too clear. "I'll move back," she said immediately, her voice breaking over the video call. "I can transfer my residency." "No," Ethan interrupted firmly, gripping the phone tighter. "You won't put your life on hold for this. I'm still here, Lily. I'm still me." But even as the words left his mouth, he watched his coffee mug tremble in his other hand, the reality of his changing body impossible to deny. A week after his diagnosis, Ethan received a carefully worded email from his publisher. His editor, Miranda, wanted to meet for coffee. He knew what was coming before he arrived at the cafe. "We're concerned about the timetable for your manuscript," Miranda began after the obligatory inquiries about his health. Her eyes couldn't quite meet his. "Given the circumstances, we're thinking it might be best to put the project on hold." "You mean you don't want to invest in a book by a dying author?" Ethan said flatly. Miranda flinched. "God, Ethan, that's not fair. We're thinking of your health, the pressure of deadlines." "My deadline just got a lot more real, Miranda." Ethan's voice remained quiet but firm. "Writing isn't pressure. It's the only thing keeping me sane right now." She placed a hand on his. "Take some time. Think about what you really want to focus on. Maybe a memoir instead." Ethan withdrew his hand. "I'm a novelist. That hasn't changed." But something had changed. As he left the cafe, he knew his carefully cultivated writing career was already being dismantled. The publishing world was writing him off before his body had failed him. That night, he sat at his grandfather's desk and deleted the manuscript he'd been working on. The literary family drama felt hollow now, disconnected from the urgent reality of his existence. If he had limited time to speak to the world, he needed to say something that mattered. He opened a new document and typed a title, The Measured Distance. His hands cramped and trembled, but he forced them to obey. 200 words became 500, then 1,000. He wrote until dawn, ignoring the pain, racing against the clock he could now hear ticking in every cell of his body. By summer, the progression of Ethan's condition had accelerated beyond the doctor's expectations. His hands now betrayed him regularly, making typing nearly impossible. He transitioned to voice recognition software, but found the distance between thought and spoken word frustrating. after years of allowing his ideas to flow directly through his fingers. "It's like translating my own thoughts," he complained to Lily during one of their weekly video calls, frustration evident in his slurring words. "Everything loses something in the process, like I'm speaking through a bad interpreter." His sister, dark circles under her eyes from her residency schedule, studied him through the screen. "You need help, Ethan? I'm coming home." This time, he didn't argue. The next weekend, Lily arrived with 2 suitcases and a determination that brooked no resistance. She took a leave of absence from her residency program, arranged for a temporary position at the local hospital, and moved into Ethan's spare bedroom. "This is temporary," she insisted as she organized his medications, "just until we get you set up with proper care." They both knew it wasn't temporary. The disease was moving fast, already affecting his speech and making swallowing difficult. But having Lily there allowed him to focus his dwindling energy on what mattered most, finishing his novel. Dr. Sharma visited weekly now, her initial clinical distance gradually replaced by genuine concern. She had begun referring to Ethan's case in her lectures at the medical school, not just as an example of early-onset ALS, but as a study in patient autonomy and purpose. "Most of my colleagues would have you in full-time care by now," she admitted during one visit. "But I've never seen someone maintain such cognitive clarity while pursuing a goal. Your approach is unorthodox, but I can't argue with the results." Every morning, she helped him set up at his desk. Every evening, she reviewed what he'd managed to dictate during the day. Between her shifts at the hospital, she researched adaptive technologies, joined online support groups for ALS families, and quietly shouldered the growing burden of his physical care. "I found something," she said one evening in late August, setting her laptop in front of him. "There's a researcher at MIT developing a brain-computer interface specifically for people with neurodegenerative diseases. Look, early results are promising." Ethan read the article slowly, his eyes moving across the screen while Lily held his wrist to help control the mouse. "They're looking for test subjects," she added, a cautious hope in her voice. "I think you should apply." "They'll want someone who can complete their study," Ethan said, the words slurring slightly. "Someone who'll stick around longer." Lily's expression hardened. "Then email this Dr. Chen and tell her exactly that. Tell her you're a writer with ALS who doesn't have time for their cautious research timelines. Tell her you need solutions now, not next year." That night, with Lily's help, Ethan composed a message to Dr. Maya Chen that was part application, part challenge. He explained his situation, his novel, and why her research mattered beyond academic publications and grant renewals. Real people were losing their voices every day, people like him. To his surprise, Dr. Chen replied the next morning. She wanted to speak with him as soon as possible. By October, Ethan had become Dr. Chen's most dedicated test subject. The prototype interface, a non-invasive cap studded with sensors that detected neural activity, was crude compared to what she hoped to develop, but it allowed Ethan to bypass his failing body and convert thoughts directly to text. The learning curve was steep. Hours of concentration produced only fragments of coherent sentences at first. The technology required intense mental focus, and sessions left him exhausted. But for the first time since his diagnosis, Ethan felt hope, not for a cure, but for the ability to complete what might be his final work. The novel had evolved from his initial concept. The measured distance now centered on Gabriel, a character with ALS who discovers that his condition grants him unique perspective, the ability to see connections between people and events invisible to others. It wasn't autobiographical, but it drew from the clarity Ethan had found in facing his own mortality. "This isn't about ALS," he tried to explain to Lily one evening after a particularly productive session with the interface. "It's about how limitation transforms perspective, how losing certain capacities might enhance others." Lily, exhausted from her hospital shift, nodded without fully understanding. She was more concerned with his ongoing medical care than his literary ambitions. The previous week, he developed pneumonia, a common complication for ALS patients with weakening respiratory muscles. The hospitalization had terrified her in a way his gradual decline hadn't. "I spoke with Mom and Dad today," she said, changing the subject. "They want to come stay for Thanksgiving." Ethan knew what remained unspoken. They wanted to see him while he could still communicate, while he was still recognizably himself. He was declining faster than anyone had predicted. His speech was now almost unintelligible to anyone but Lily. His legs had weakened to the point that he used a wheelchair even for short distances. But his mind remained sharp, perhaps even more focused than before his diagnosis. The interface allowed him to capture that clarity, to preserve his voice even as his physical voice failed. November brought both setbacks and breakthroughs. Another hospitalization, this time for respiratory distress that required him to begin using a ventilator at night. But also a significant improvement in the interface, allowing him to write at nearly half his former typing speed. During one session with Dr. Chen, Ethan managed to articulate a thought that had been forming for weeks. "This technology isn't just for writing books," the computer translated his thoughts. "It's for preserving humanity. When the body fails, the person is still there. Still thinking, feeling, creating, still me." Dr. Chen, normally focused on technical measurements and data collection, paused her note-taking. Her eyes met his with unexpected emotion. "That's exactly what drives my research, Ethan. Not just extending function, but maintaining humanity." She smiled slightly. "Though I admit I rarely get to express it that eloquently in grant applications." Robert and Catherine arrived that weekend with news. Robert had convinced his university's bioethics department to host a symposium on communication technologies for patients with neurodegenerative diseases. Dr. Chen would be a featured speaker. "It's not just about the technology," Robert explained, his philosopher's mind always seeking the deeper implications. "It's about redefining our understanding of voice, of presence. Your work is challenging fundamental assumptions about consciousness and expression." Catherine, ever practical, added, "And it will help secure more funding for Maya's research." By December, Ethan had completed 3/4 of his manuscript. The medical team monitoring his condition was surprised by his continued cognitive clarity despite his physical deterioration. His neurologist, Dr. Sharma, who had delivered his diagnosis months earlier, now visited his apartment to observe his work with the interface. "Your neural activity patterns are remarkable," she noted, reviewing his latest scans. "The intense mental engagement might actually be creating compensatory pathways. It's not changing the disease progression, but it's adapting around it." But even this silver lining had its limits. As Christmas approached, Ethan developed another respiratory infection. The hospitalization lasted 2 weeks, that during which he was unable to use the interface. When he returned home, weaker than before, Dr. Chen brought discouraging news. "The research funding is being redirected," she explained gently. "The university wants to focus on invasive interfaces with more immediate commercial applications." Her frustration was evident. They don't see the value in communication technologies for degenerative conditions. The market is too small, the investment too large. Ethan, now using an eye gaze device to communicate when not connected to the interface, spelled out a single word: continue. "Ethan, I can't." Dr. Chen's voice faltered. The university committee was clear. Without funding, he cut her off with a slow shake of his head, then laboriously spelled, "My apartment, bring equipment, we finish." Dr. Chen glanced at Lily, who had been quietly listening. "Is he serious?" "Always," Lily replied, her jaw set with the same determination as her brother's. "And I'll help. I've watched you set up the system enough times now." This would be completely unofficial. No institutional support, no medical oversight. "He doesn't have time for official channels," Lily interrupted, her voice quiet but unyielding. "And neither do all the other patients who could benefit from your work." After a long moment, Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll need to borrow some equipment." and we'll need to modify the protocols for a home environment. Ethan's eyes found the manuscript displayed on his computer screen. The story still unfinished, the message still undelivered. Then he looked at the ventilator helping him breathe, the feeding tube now providing his nutrition, the medical equipment that kept his failing body functioning. Technology was already extending his life. Now it would extend his voice. By February, Ethan's condition had deteriorated to near total paralysis. He communicated entirely through eye movements and, during sessions with the modified interface, through his thoughts. Dr. Chen had installed the equipment in his living room, converting the space into an unofficial research lab. The rogue operation had gained a third conspirator, Dr. Chen's graduate assistant, Wei, who recognized the importance of their work. Between them, they maintained a schedule that allowed Ethan to write for several hours each day, capturing his thoughts directly through the interface. The manuscript grew steadily, despite frequent technical issues and Ethan's declining health. What had begun as a novel about limitation had evolved into something more profound, an exploration of consciousness itself, of what remains when the physical self begins to fade. "Your imagery has changed," Lily observed one evening after reviewing the day's work. "It's more, I don't know how to describe it, ethereal? Like you're seeing things from a different vantage point." Ethan blinked once, their signal for yes. "I used to worry that this disease would diminish your voice as a writer," she continued, "but it's done the opposite. This is the most powerful writing you've ever done." What Lily didn't say was that she feared the book would remain unread. The major publishers had made it clear they weren't interested in acquiring a novel from an author who might not survive to promote it. The few small presses they'd approached wanted significant changes that would make the book more marketable, changes Ethan refused to consider. In March, pneumonia struck again. This time, the hospitalization stretched into weeks. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about palliative care and quality versus quantity of life. Lily fought fiercely for aggressive treatment, knowing that Ethan's mind was still vibrant behind his failing body. When he finally returned home, Dr. Chen and Wei arrived with a modified version of the interface that could work around his now constant ventilator. Over the next 2 weeks, in short, exhausting sessions, Ethan completed the final chapters of his novel. The manuscript, titled The Measured Distance, ended not with his protagonist's death, but with a transcendent moment of connection. Gabriel finds that as his physical senses dim, his awareness of the underlying patterns connecting all living things intensifies. The disease that isolates him physically ultimately connects him to humanity in a deeper way. When the final page was complete, Ethan used the eye gaze device to spell a simple message: "Now publish." Lily exchanged glances with Dr. Chen. They had discussed this moment, but had hoped for more time to develop a strategy. With Ethan's condition now critical, that luxury was gone. "We have a plan," Lily told him. "Wei has experience with self-publishing platforms. We're going to release it as an ebook first, then print on demand if there's interest." Ethan blinked once. "Yes, I've also contacted some of the reviewers who praised your first book. A few have agreed to read it, though I can't promise anything." Another blink. Dr. Chen stepped forward. "And I've arranged for the interface research to be documented as part of the book's release. How you wrote it matters as much as what you wrote." Dr. Sharma, who had become an unexpected ally, added, "I've shared your case with several colleagues in neurology. They're interested in how the intensive cognitive engagement of writing has affected your neural pathways. With your permission, I'd like to include an afterword about the medical implications." Ethan's eyes moved to his computer screen, where the completed manuscript was displayed. 300 pages created by a mind trapped in a failing body. A testament not just to his resilience, but to the enduring human need to communicate, to connect, to leave something behind. Wei handled the technical aspects of publishing, creating a professional-looking ebook with a cover designed by one of Lily's artist friends. They priced it modestly and wrote a simple description that mentioned Ethan's condition but emphasized the novel's literary merits rather than its unusual creation. The book went live in early April with little fanfare. They had no marketing budget, no publicity plan beyond Lily's emails to literary bloggers and her posts in online reading communities. For the first week, sales trickled in slowly. Friends, family, a few loyal readers of Ethan's first novel. Then something unexpected happened. Peter Kincaid, the literary critic who had championed Thresholds 3 years earlier, posted a lengthy review of The Measured Distance on his widely read blog. The review began, "Occasionally a book comes along that doesn't merely tell a story but transforms how stories can be told. Ethan Marshall's The Measured Distance is such a work, a novel that redefines the relationship between consciousness, language, and the physical vessel that contains them." The review went viral. It was shared by authors, critics, and readers across social media, each adding their own reactions to Marshall's revolutionary prose and transcendent perspective. The backstory of how the book was written using experimental brain-computer interface technology added to the growing interest. A week later, a major newspaper ran a feature on Ethan, Dr. Chen, and the rogue research project that had made the novel possible. The article included quotes from neurologists and literary scholars discussing the unprecedented nature of both the writing method and the resulting work. Marshall has achieved something extraordinary. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, professor of contemporary literature at Columbia, was quoted saying, "He's created a new literary perspective. Prose written from the edge of embodiment, where the physical constraints of illness become a unique vantage point rather than a limitation." In a separate interview, Dr. Neha Sharma spoke about the medical implications. "As Ethan's neurologist, from diagnosis through his remarkable journey, I've had to reconsider many of our assumptions about ALS and cognitive preservation. His case challenges the traditional medical model that often focuses solely on physical symptoms while overlooking the profound importance of purpose and creative engagement in patients with degenerative conditions." Sales surged. The Measured Distance climbed the online bestseller lists. Translation rights were requested by publishers in 12 countries. And then, most surprisingly, Ethan's former publisher reached out to Lily with an offer for print distribution. The same publisher that had abandoned his second novel when his diagnosis became known. By summer, The Measured Distance had become a literary phenomenon. Critics debated whether to classify it as science fiction, literary fiction, or something entirely new. Medical journals published articles about the brain-computer interface that had made it possible. Universities added the novel to their contemporary literature curricula. Throughout this unexpected success, Ethan remained in his apartment, his condition now so advanced that only the ventilator and round-the-clock care kept him alive. His mind, however, remained active. Using the increasingly refined interface, he was able to communicate not just through text, but through a synthesized voice that preserved some of his natural speech patterns. Dr. Chen's unauthorized research had attracted serious attention from medical technology companies. With Ethan's case as compelling evidence, she secured substantial funding to develop the next generation of the interface, one that would be more accessible to patients with various neurodegenerative conditions. "Your novel opened doors that years of academic papers couldn't," she told Ethan during one of their regular sessions. "People respond to stories in a way they never respond to data." Ethan's synthesized voice replied, "Stories are how we make meaning. They're how we understand what can't be measured: suffering, connection, transcendence." 2 years after his diagnosis, Ethan Marshall continued to defy medical expectations. His physical condition remained critical, sustained by technology and constant care. But his cognitive functions showed no signs of the deterioration typically associated with advanced ALS. Dr. Sharma, who had once delivered his devastating prognosis, now studied his case with profound interest. During a home visit, she carefully reviewed his latest tests. There are cases where intense cognitive engagement seems to create compensatory neural pathways, she suggested, her clinical detachment now replaced with genuine curiosity. But honestly, Ethan, you're helping us reconsider what we thought we knew about this disease. The measured distance had been translated into 27 languages. A foundation established in Ethan's name provided funding for both literary grants and ALS research, particularly focused on communication technologies for patients who could no longer speak or write conventionally. The interface technology had evolved significantly, allowing Ethan to begin work on a new novel, a process that would have been impossible 2 years earlier. The equipment that filled his living room had been refined into a sleek headset connected to a specialized computer system. "They're calling you a miracle case," Lily told him one evening as she adjusted his ventilator settings. "The doctor who told you to prepare for what's ahead now uses your story in her lectures." Through the voice synthesizer, Ethan replied, "I'm not a miracle, I'm just stubborn." Lily smiled. "That's the understatement of the century." The interface activated as Ethan composed his thoughts. The synthesized voice continued, "The disease took my body, but it gave me a perspective I never would have found otherwise. Sometimes limitation isn't an end, but a beginning." As the sun began to set over Adams Street, spring had returned to the neighborhood. The trees were budding again, just as they had been on the day of his diagnosis. People still hurried along the sidewalk, carrying coffee cups and checking phones. The world continued its relentless forward motion. But Ethan Marshall had found a different kind of movement. Not through space, but through connection. Through the words that bridged the gap between his consciousness and the minds of readers around the world. Through the technology that allowed him to reach beyond the measured distance of his physical limitations. In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by the machines that kept him alive and the people who kept him connected. Lily arranging his medication, his father discussing philosophical implications of his work, his mother advocating fiercely with healthcare providers, Ethan continued to write. Each word a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Each sentence evidence that even the most devastating diagnosis cannot silence a voice determined to be heard. The doctor had told him to prepare for the end. Instead, he had discovered a new beginning. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.